Hey everyone, welcome back to the deep dive. You know how we do things around here? We take a topic, a company, a trend, whatever's got people talking, and we really dig in.
That's right. We gather up reports, earnings calls, analyst opinions, the whole nine yards, and then we break it all down for you. No jargon, no fluff, just the good stuff.
Exactly. So today we're strapping on our yoga pants, metaphorically speaking, and taking a deep dive into Lululemon Athletica, the athletic apparel giant.
LULU, the ticker symbol for those playing along at home.
Yep. Now, we've got a mountain of info here, so buckle up. We're going to cover everything from their latest financial performance to where the experts think they're headed. Our mission today is to give you that clear, concise understanding of what's going on with Lululemon, where they stand right now, and what their potential looks like moving forward. Sound good?
Let's do it.
Awesome. So, first things first, Lululemon just wrapped up their fiscal year 2024, and to put it simply, they crushed it.
They did. Exceeded expectations across the board. Really hit some impressive milestones.
No kidding. They blew past their own guidance for both the fourth quarter and the full year.
Right.
And get this, they crossed that $10 billion mark in annual revenue for the very first time. I mean, that's a big deal. They actually sailed past their own Power of 3x2 plan, which was already pretty ambitious.
It definitely speaks volumes about their growth trajectory. They're not just keeping pace, they're setting it.
Totally. And it's not just that they sold more stuff, it's what they sold that's really interesting. Their new product innovations like Glow Up, Daydrift, and Mile Maker, those saw some really strong early sales.
Absolutely. I think that shows they're still in tune with what their customers are looking for.
For sure. And it's not just about the shiny new stuff. They're still innovating with their core products, too. The Align franchise, for example, is still expanding, and they just launched this new Lululemon fabric.
Yeah, it's clear they're not resting on their laurels. They're actively looking for ways to keep things fresh.
Now, it would dive into those Q4 earnings specifically. Revenue was up 8% or 9% in constant currency, meaning if you take out the impact of those currency fluctuations. But what really caught my eye was their operating margin. It actually increased by 40 basis points.
Which is 0.4%, just for clarity.
Right, thanks for that. And their earnings per share jumped up a solid 16%. Plus, they repurchased a good chunk of their own stock in Q4.
That margin increase is really noteworthy. It suggests they have decent pricing power, they can charge a premium for their products, and that they're managing their operations efficiently. That stock buyback, that could be a sign that management thinks the company is undervalued right now.
Makes sense. Now, zooming out to the full year, we see that positive trend continuing. They hit that $10.6 billion in revenue, achieving that 8 to 9% growth we talked about. Adjusted operating margin also saw a bump 50 basis points this time. And adjusted earnings per share, up 15%. So yeah, the recent past is looking pretty rosy for Lululemon. But as always, we got to look ahead. What are they expecting for the future, and what kind of challenges are they facing?
Well, when you look at their projections for the full year 2025, the revenue growth is a bit more, tempered is a good word. They're expecting something between 5 and 7%,
Okay.
or 7 to 8% if you exclude the effect of that 53rd week.
Okay.
Yeah, it does suggest a slightly more cautious outlook compared to the previous year.
I see. So what's behind that more cautious outlook?
A big factor seems to be the U.S. market.
Oh.
They're anticipating just modest revenue growth here in the U.S., and a lot of that seems tied to the overall economic picture. Inflation's still a thing, people are feeling a little uncertain, and that can make consumers a bit more hesitant to open their wallets.
That's fair. So basically, a little less treat yourself and a little more watch the budget.
Exactly. And this raises an important point about Lululemon's reliance on the U.S. market. Can they weather any potential economic slowdown here?
Right. And it's not just about revenue growth either. They're also projecting a dip in their full year 2025 operating margin, around 100 basis points, or 1%.
Yeah, that margin compression is something to watch.
So where's that pressure on margins coming from?
It seems to be a combination of factors. Their fixed costs, like rent and salaries, are becoming a bigger part of their overall expenses as that revenue growth potentially slows down.
Makes sense.
Plus, there are those unfavorable currency exchange rates that can make their earnings from international sales worth less when they convert them back to U.S. dollars.
Right. That makes it harder to maintain the same profitability.
Exactly. And then there are those increased tariffs, especially on goods coming from China and Mexico.
Ah, right. Those pesky tariffs.
They estimate that those alone could shave about 20 basis points off their operating margin. We're also looking at a projected decrease in their gross margin, somewhere around 60 basis points. So even if they manage to keep growing their sales, their profitability could be squeezed a bit.
It sounds like a bit of a balancing act, right?
It is. It's a question of whether their growth initiatives can outweigh those profitability challenges.
Got it. So let's talk about those growth initiatives. They've got some ambitious plans for their physical stores, right?
Yeah, they're aiming for about a 10% increase in their total square footage in 2025. And a big focus of that expansion is international markets.
That makes sense. There's a lot of room to grow outside the U.S.
Huge potential. But it's not a slam dunk. Their brand awareness in many of those international markets is still relatively low compared to what we see here in North America. Think single digits in places like France, Germany, and Japan.
Wow, that's surprising. I mean, Lululemon feels pretty ubiquitous here.
It does, but internationally, it's a different story. They've got a lot of work to do to build that brand recognition.
Okay, so low awareness is a challenge, but also a massive opportunity if they can crack the code, right?
Absolutely. And to support all this expansion, they've also got a significant capital expenditure plan.
Yeah, we're talking $740 to $760 million earmarked for capital expenditures.
That's a serious investment.
No doubt. Now, if we zoom in on the very near term, their guidance for the first quarter of 2025 projects revenue between $2.335 and $2.355 billion. That's a 6 to 7% increase. Gross margin is expected to be basically flat for Q1, but they're still expecting that operating margin pressure to continue, and they're estimating earnings per share will fall somewhere between $2.53 and $2.58.
A bit of a mixed bag in the short term.
For sure. So with all that said, let's shift gears and talk about what gives Lululemon that competitive edge and what risks they might be facing.
Okay, so one thing Lululemon has going for them is some serious brand loyalty in their core markets. People love their stuff, and they just keep coming out with innovative products, which gives them a real advantage. Some analysts even refer to it as a narrow economic moat.
All right, narrow economic moat. Sounds impressive,
There.
but break that down for me. What does that actually mean in real-world terms?
Sure. Basically, it means they have some lasting advantages that help protect their profits from competitors.
Got it.
In Lululemon's case, that comes from their strong brand. People are willing to pay a premium for that logo and their knack for consistently releasing new, desirable products. They've built a reputation for high-quality technical apparel, and they've got a very dedicated customer base, especially in the US and Canada.
Makes sense. You see people rocking Lululemon gear everywhere. It's practically a uniform in some circles.
True, but as we mentioned earlier, their brand awareness is still pretty low in a lot of international markets. I mean, single-digit awareness in some major European and Asian countries is pretty surprising, especially when you consider how well-known they are here.
Yeah, it really highlights the scale of the challenge, but also the potential, right? If they can capture even a fraction of those markets, it could be huge.
It could be a game changer.
So how are they going about building that brand presence internationally?
Well, they're trying a few different things. They're organizing community events, partnering with influencers and ambassadors like Lewis Hamilton and Joan McDonald, and launching global marketing campaigns.
Okay, so a mix of local engagement and big splashy marketing.
Exactly. But even with those advantages, there are risks. We've already talked about that potential for lower profit margins, and that uncertainty in the U.S. economy could really impact consumer spending, which would hit them hard.
Let's be real, the athletic apparel market is getting pretty crowded.
It is. More competition could definitely put pressure on Lululemon's market share.
And, since they are a premium brand, they're probably more vulnerable if the economy weakens and those higher income consumers start tightening their belts.
All valid points to consider. Now, let's quickly touch on what the analysts are saying about Lululemon's stock. It's always interesting to get their perspective, though it's just one piece of the puzzle.
For sure. So what's the overall sentiment?
Well, according to one analyst we looked at, the current share price is actually below their estimated fair value.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. And the average price target from analysts over the past 6 months is even higher than that.
So some analysts think the stock is undervalued right now.
Seems that way. But there have been some adjustments in those price targets recently, which isn't unusual after earnings announcements and as market conditions change.
Makes sense.
For example, Needham lowered their price target, but they actually upgraded the stock to a buy recommendation back in January.
Okay, so they're less bullish on the price, but still optimistic overall.
Exactly. Then you have Bernstein, who gave Lululemon an outperform rating with a higher price target. And then there are others like Deutsche Bank who raised their target, while Oppenheimer and Baird both lowered theirs to $380. It's a real mix of opinions out there.
A lot of different perspectives to weigh.
There is. But it's interesting to see that both Loop Capital and KeyBank specifically mentioned the potential for strong growth in China. It really underscores the importance of that international expansion strategy we talked about earlier.
For sure. Now, we also have some data on the overall analyst sentiment, looking at those strong buy, hold, sell, and strong sell ratings over the past year. It gives you a sense of the general feeling about the stock beyond just those specific price targets.
Right. It provides a broader context. They're just a quick rundown of some key financial metrics. We've got their trailing 12-month revenue and net income, their forward earnings per share estimates, and their price to sales and price to earnings ratios. All of these help us understand how the market is currently valuing the company relative to its performance and future prospects.
So we're looking at a company with a solid track record, some ambitious plans, and a few potential bumps in the road.
That's a good summary. And don't forget, their economic moat rating is considered narrow, which is a reminder that while they do have those advantages, they're not invincible. And lastly, it's worth noting that they have consistently beaten earnings expectations in recent quarters, which is generally seen as a positive sign.
Okay, so as we wrap up this deep dive into Lululemon, what are the key takeaways you should walk away with?
Well, first off, Lululemon has a history of strong performance, and they have a lot of potential for future growth,
Right.
especially as they expand internationally and keep innovating with their products.
How about
But they're facing some near-term challenges, particularly those anticipated margin pressures and that uncertain economic environment in the U.S. These are definitely factors to keep an eye on.
All right, so it sounds like Lululemon is at a bit of a crossroads. They've got a lot of momentum, but also some headwinds to navigate.
Exactly. It'll be interesting to see how they manage this next chapter.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you to do your own research, dig into those financial statements, and come to your own conclusions.
Informed investors are the best investors.
Couldn't agree more. So here's a final thought for you to ponder. Considering those ambitious plans for international growth alongside those margin pressures, what specific financial metrics do you think will be the most telling indicators of their future success?
What numbers should you be paying closest attention to as they release those future reports?
That's something to chew on. And hey, if you enjoyed this deep dive, please do us a favor and hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future episodes.
We appreciate your support. It helps us keep bringing you these in-depth analyses, cutting through the noise, and delivering the insights that matter.
Thanks for tuning in to the deep dive. We'll catch you next time.
See you then.